Hello, all. Welcome to the show. I'm Gus Gagliardi, and this is Fire Code Tech. On Fire Code Tech, we interview fire protection professionals from all different careers and backgrounds in order to provide insight and a resource for those in the field. My goal is to help you become a more informed fire protection professional. Fire Code Tech has interviews with engineers and researchers, fire marshals, and insurance professionals, and highlights topics like codes and standards, engineering systems, professional development, and trending topics in the industry. So if you're someone who wants to know more about fire protection or the fascinating stories of those who are in the field, you're in the right place. Hello all. Welcome to Fire Code Tech, episode 43. In this episode, we're talking with John Mackey. Speaking with John, we get into some very timely topics, such as what are some of the big market factors that are moving for fire and life safety. John has a special interest in technology and where the field is going, so I pick his brain about NFPA 915, the standard for remote inspections, and we talk in depth about technology and how that's going to change the way we adapt to new work. John's current role at the Mackey Group centers around helping companies facilitate mergers and acquisitions. We get into what does this mean for the fire and life safety space, as well as some other topics like the history around the subject. Tune into this episode if, like me, you are interested in learning about some business development topics and some high-level macroeconomics for the fire and life safety space. Before we get into the episode, I just want to remind you, please subscribe so you never miss an episode and follow us on social media. Oh, and if you want to do me a huge solid, give me a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Helps out the algorithm. And let's get into the show. Well, hello, John. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome to Fire Code Tech.
Hey, good morning, Gus. Happy to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Awesome. Well, I always like to get started with a bit on your background. John, would you mind telling me a little bit about your first role or so, or first couple of roles in fire and life safety and kind of how you found the field?
Yeah, no problem at all. Very interesting path, I think, and how I found myself in fire. The first half of my career was all in human resources. I'd worked in U.S. manufacturing, building materials, retail, and I was working for Coors Brewing Company at the time out in Denver, Colorado, at the brewery, and got a call from a headhunter that said, "Hey, we've got this great opportunity for director of HR in Marinette, Wisconsin, for Ansel." Being a Midwest guy, an opportunity to get back closer to home. My wife and I explored the opportunity and took the leap, and went to work with Mark Vandover, who at the time was the president of Ansel. And I guess the rest would be history at this point, because it's been a 15-year run in fire protection. That opportunity at Ansel really exposed me to some of the best people in the industry. Some of them are still working here today: Mark Ross, Dennis Kennedy, Dave Pelton, and some have retired: Bill Smith, Mark Vandover, and many others. But that really set the tone. Back in 2006 is when that started. And today, I look back at that opportunity as just really transformational for my career and for what I'm able to do today. So
Cool. Yeah. It's interesting how you have a bit of a varied perspective. It seems like it's a common thread for people to kind of find their way into fire and life safety. But yeah, I appreciate that little bit of exposition on your origin story. I wanted to ask a bit more about some of those roles. You work for some interesting companies, and I feel like that has shaped what you're doing now. So I wonder if you would speak a little bit more about the roles you held for Ansel and some of the other business development kind of roles you had at Hiller and Company. Or yeah, if you would just speak a little bit more about your career experience.
absolutely, yes. Like I said, the Ansel role was truly the gateway to a really interesting career path. Like I said, early on, it was all human resources. It turned out I was in the HR role for Ansel for about 18 months. And then Tyco went through a restructure, and I was given the opportunity to lead a global merger, right? So Tyco Fire Products, which was primarily the mechanical fittings and the sprinkler business, was merging with the Ansel Special Hazards and the fire protection equipment business. And I was given the opportunity to lead that. I never really had a background in mergers and acquisitions, but I was the one person that really understood both aspects of the human resources function in Ansel as well as the fire product side of things. And because I had relationships on both sides of the business, Colleen Repplier, the president at the time, thought it was a great opportunity for me to step out of HR and lead this global merger. And that really gave me a perspective of really understanding the bigger strategy for the fire business and how you build business models to support and drive that. I was in that leadership role for about 18 months and traveled around the world, really got to understand the fire market globally. And then the recession hit in 2008, and we got through the first couple phases of the project and decided it was time to reallocate resources. So I rolled out of the merger team and into a regional sales P&L where I led the Eastern U.S. Across the integrated product portfolio. So sprinkler, fire extinguishers, special hazards foam, and even mechanical fittings. And what I truly enjoyed about that opportunity is, one, really spending time with the customers and the end users of the fire products, which was really, really insightful. But then being able to understand what we did in the development of the strategy for the combined business, and then being able to be in a role where I was able to drive that strategy deeper into the market, and did that in the field. Really got to know the customers through that process. Some of them are good friends of mine today. And then also working with the sales team and a well-run group of folks that, were really passionate about the products that they represented. And, I'd say lifelong, people in the fire protection space, if it's special hazards folks or sprinkler salespeople. It was really, really interesting to see what we're able to do from a sales perspective. I left Tyco in 2012 with an opportunity to go work for my largest customer, which was the Hiller Companies down in Mobile, Alabama. And I was at Hiller for about almost 8 years. And while I was there, we led all the M&A strategy, both identifying targets to help Hiller grow. And if you're not familiar with Hiller, Hiller is the oldest fire protection contractor in the United States, over 100 years old, well rooted in the marine fire protection space, but they were in a growth curve around commercial and industrial markets, really going after the service space in fire protection. And they asked me to lead a number of efforts around the M&A, the service operations and how we change the service model, and the deployment of technology to meet customers' needs and to be able to grow the business quickly. And then I left Hiller in 2020, right before COVID, to start a little consulting business where I now advocate for the industry and help drive M&A into the markets, either on the sell side, if you're a contractor looking to sell your business, or on the buy side, if you're looking to acquire, and a number of other things. But it's been a fun couple of years and helping drive some of those initiatives across the space.
Wow, what a interesting time to be starting your own business last year. Was it just before the pandemic that you were kind of starting your own endeavor, or when did that kind of happen?
So I had, kind of dabbled in a, little consulting practice on the side for a few years, just doing advising calls and, just helping friends think through how to grow their business, and not necessarily getting paid for it, but just, being helpful. And I feel it's important to help support each other in our industry, and felt there was an opportunity for me to kind of pay things forward. So I'd done that for a few years, but officially turn the lights on the office and hang in a shingle to say we're open for business. That started in mid-February of 2020, and as we all know, the U.S. came to a screeching halt. I think around March 13th or 14th of that year, and I was very fortunate to have a client that was committed to what we were trying to do, and we muscled through the first couple of months of COVID and the pandemic, and then as we all know, the fire protection space came back, full speed, the end of May and the rest of the summer of last year, and it's been a very interesting journey for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a couple points you talked about in your kind of background, and I'd love to expand upon. I listened to a couple of the interviews at the Fire Protection podcast, and was really interested to hear that you had a lot of insight for just the market and the global and the national perspective on the market factors for fire and life safety. So I think that's really interesting. I'd love to speak with you about that. It was unique to get a clip of what you were thinking in the midst of the pandemic. So I'd love to hear more about um, what you're thinking now that we're looking at. I don't know if you can call it post pandemic, but this more sustained um, kind of new landscape that we're looking at. But yeah, I'd love to hear more about what you're seeing in the market on in a macro picture.
Well, sure. Yeah, I think we've really learned a lot about our industry, number one, and number two, as contract owners, what drove success and helped them get through the pandemic, especially the uncertainty of what was going to happen in the short term, and then what we learned throughout the year. If I remember back to that fire protection podcast that I did with Drew Slocum, we talked a lot about the role that technology was going to play in getting through the pandemic. And where we were coming from in that discussion was the early adopters of technology were already in a leadership position, or at least in a better position, to one, understand the service cycle, what inspections were due and when, the best or the best in class or the better software solutions were able to really deploy their technicians remotely and allowed for a remote workforce. So you had dispatchers and schedulers that were working from home. Technicians weren't necessarily coming to the office, and they were able to manage the work through the internet, off of cell phones and tablets, and ultimately take care of the customer through that process. And I think that the companies that were able to really get up and running quickly, when I say quickly, end of April and early May, as long as they were in cities that weren't in lockdown, most of those fire chiefs and fire marshals said, fire protection service is an essential part of our community, and the work has to be done. And so those technicians and those contractors were able to go take care of that. And I think roll the clock forward to where we're at today. I think that was probably the cornerstone of why the industry was successful, getting through the pandemic early. And then you look at last year's industry performance, very strong. You talk to most of the contractors in the space. I mean, when I say space, being fire life safety as a whole, everyone seems to have said they had record years, and that continues into today with regards to the volume of work that everyone's getting done. Everyone I've talked to talks about how immensely busy they are, and with regard to upgrading new systems and staying on top of the inspection work that needs to be done.
Yeah, I think that technology piece is really interesting. I work for a company with this a bit more progressive as far as looking at new technologies as it relates to the architecture, engineering, and construction industry. Things like 3D laser scanning and apps to make the business stronger. So I thought that was a really good point that you brought up. And one phrase that you were speaking about in your conversation with Drew was, and I thought was a good point as somebody with an entrepreneurial mind, but also just for businesses in general, was you said, easy to use, easy to buy, easy to pay. And you were describing, how to get a competitive edge as a business. I thought that was a good takeaway. But yeah, I didn't know if you had any more thoughts about that and the role of technology and business kind of being adaptable.
Yes, thank you. It, when you look at this concept around easy to use, easy to buy, easy to pay, it all speaks to the end user customer. Right? You're on the architect engineering side. I'm coming at it from a contractor perspective. If you're the OEM, look how we live our personal lives. Right? We're living off of our phones. We're doing one click buying on Amazon or bestbuy.com, or pick a website or an app that we're buying through. And so now that expectation rolls over into the business to business, or the commercial side of service. And or I'm not saying we're going to sell engineered systems through one click buying on an app, but I think when you talk about a service contract or servicing your facility, we can make it pretty easy. And so easy to use is two-way. One, your customer's experience has to be pretty easy to understand on how the workflow process, or the work flows through the system. But it also has to be easy to use in the office. It can't create a significant administrative burden on the folks that are back in the office trying to manage the work. So it has to be practical. I'm not going to say it's simple, but it has to be practical. When you talk about easy to buy, it just has to be very simple for the customer to make a decision to buy. Right? I'm a big advocate for just click here, boom, one button. And then easy to pay. Look how we're able to manage cash today as a consumer. If it's credit cards that are already set up on a profile on an application or on a website. If it's the ability to pay through Venmo and PayPal and other cash management type systems, or even traditional commercial applications like bank transfers and automatic cash handling processes. But give your customer a few options to pay, and with the more technology you can bring into that process, the less administrative tasks or responsibilities they have with regard to how to cut a check. Because when someone's got to write a check today, think of all the steps associated with that. Probably takes you maybe a minute. Whereas if it's approve the payment with one click of a button, that takes seconds. And so that's the concept around making it easy.
For sure. Yeah, that's a great point. I think that we get so focused on performing the task. I think in fire and life safety in general, sometimes we don't think about keeping up with some technology that has become so commonplace in other market sectors. So I think that's a great point in streamlining the process at every step and kind of giving people the opportunity to not have to think so much about being involved in the process. I think fire and life safety as a whole could benefit from that. Um, but I wanted to also speak with you about your history in kind of the inspection, testing, and maintenance industry. You had some good points on your podcast with Drew about just the nature of that kind of business, how it's a kind of churning workflow that has set intervals and a business model that is predictable. I never kind of, I guess that makes intuitive sense with what ITM and expecting fire and life safety systems is. But yeah, I don't know. I just thought that was remarkable to hear about your time being involved with that market and just kind of the unique business prospect that it is.
Yeah, I think that when you look at the inspection, test, maintenance aspect of fire life safety, it truly is the core of what we do. Um, and what I mean by that is, yes, very important that we're installing fire alarm panels, or even going further, designing fire protection systems, installing those panels, installing that foam system, hanging those fire extinguishers or those sprinklers. But at its roots, it's all driven around inspection, right? As we all know, NFPA codes and standards drive to a certain rhythm, weekly, monthly, quarterly, semi-annual, annual. And within those codes, they also drive to a standard of what it means for that system to be compliant. And to me, that is the foundational piece of our industry, because ultimately it drives safety in the communities that we live in, the places we work, and I think ultimately makes for better places, safer places for us to live and to live our lives. So in that context, ITM creates an environment where, one, we know the system's going to be inspected. It meets a certain standard through testing and the inspection requirements. And then when it doesn't, if it's deficient in one form or another, then it's maintained and it's repaired. Right? It serves a couple purposes. One, it helps maintain a safe environment for all of us. But two, I think if you're the building owner, it creates the opportunity for them to extend the life cycle of that system. Right? When that system's properly maintained within the codes and standards driven by NFPA or the International Building Code or the AHJ, they might be able to extend that sprinkler system another 10 years because they were doing, proper internal inspections of that piping system to make sure that there was no corrosion or no bad microorganisms living in that pipe, right?
Yeah.
You're able to cycle a fire pump to ensure that it's going to meet the pressures that are required when that fire sprinkler system is asked to do its job, right? So it really supports what we're trying to drive through the broader sense of fire and life safety and the importance that ITM creates. And it's a great, fundamental piece of our industry. And I think anyone is in the business side, the contractor side, it should be a cornerstone of how they grow their business, specific to service and, inspections.
Yeah, that's great. That's all great information. If you think about it, the installation and the modification of a system is just a very small section of the lifespan of a system. That inspection, testing, and maintenance period of the system is much longer in the life cycle than any of those other points of the business. So I appreciated that bit of exposition. As a transition from, or just a further expanding on the topic of ITM, we were speaking a little bit off air about a talk that you had given on NFPA. Is it 915, the remote inspection, testing, and maintenance? Yeah, I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on this new NFPA standard and kind of the impact that you see it having on the fire and life safety industry.
Sure. Yeah, I gave a presentation on this at the Fire Suppression Systems Association annual forum in the spring of 2020. It happened to be the last conference that the FSSA has had face to face. And the approach there was, one, at this point, the NFPA 915 committee had come together. They had met a few times, and information was now starting to come out about how this code was going to be structured. Where we're at today, the code is still in development, and as I understand it, it's up for vote in 2022, with the expectation that they're trying to put it in place by 2023. A lot of moving parts and pieces right now. So what I'm going to share is to what I've learned up to this point of where we're at. Obviously, things can change between now and the time we get to the vote cycle, and then ultimately what's implemented as part of the approved code. But what NFPA 915 does, it creates an environment where we can now put internet connected devices onto fire and life safety systems to drive compliance and a level of insurability or comfort that that system will operate in the event that it's needed to put out a fire or even detect a fire or some other issue. So where it's transformational in its original context, it said a couple of things. One, the local AHJ gets to define what is remote. And the initial concepts was, imagine a pipeline out in the middle of out in the middle of nowhere, pick a state anywhere in the United States, and it's really hard to get technicians to that facility. Why can't we fly a drone over it with a camera and visually inspect the status of that pipeline? Same concept can be said for imagine a million square foot warehouse that has sprinkler heads, and those sprinkler heads are 40 feet in the air. It's very difficult to get technicians in a man lift to go look at those sprinkler heads. Well, why can't we fly a drone up to the rafters to go inspect those sprinkler heads? So those concepts make a lot of sense. Well, now let's think of how we can make it a little bit easier with regard to how you inspect let's say, a high-rise building. Why can't I put one sprinkler technician on the first floor and put pressure devices on the risers throughout the facility to test pressure or check pressure versus a technician that has to go floor to floor to floor to floor? So does that make it a little bit more efficient to get that inspection done? Same can be said for a fire alarm panel. Being able to have one NICET, authorized or certified technician in a facility, let's say in Nevada, at the central office, but his technicians are out in the field physically, running the test or watching the test through a laptop at a hospital, and figure out ways to communicate electronically with all these IoT type, and I say IoT, Internet of Things devices to test the equipment. So conceptually, it's great. I think it has the opportunity to change the industry. What I brought up at the conference was the impact or the role that a lot of the large OEMs, the original equipment manufacturers, are playing in the market. Every one of them speak to. When I say every one of them, Johnson Controls, Siemens, Carrier, and a few others, Honeywell, have all said that they're going to drive towards the smart building technology. And so when I say smart building, it includes your ventilation systems, your water management systems, your electricity, access control, security, and they're then pulling fire protection into the suite of central building management. Right? Every OEM has some concept that they're pushing. Well, what 915 allows is for those fire systems to be plugged into these other building systems as part of the smart building concept. And once they're created, electrical or electronic devices attached to these fire systems, it starts to impact our market. And what I mean by that is that the role that a fire protection contractor today has will change the more as we get more technology adopted and into our industry. I'm not saying that's a risk, but I do say it's a challenge. And it's a challenge because I think the contractors that can grasp technology faster and help drive to some of those solutions are going to be in a better position. Not any different than what we saw with the pandemic and the companies that adopted service management technology and inspection capabilities. They were in a better position to stay on top of their customer base. 915 creates the same environment for contractors to be able to really understand what their customers' expectations are. What does the local fire service expect with regard to remote inspection? And what's my role as a contractor to go meet that need to drive compliance in our market?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think it presents a lot of interesting opportunities for contractors and people all over the industry. I haven't thought about some of those hard to reach places like being looked at by drones. The company I work for does a lot of work in aircraft hangars. We have these buildings that are 100 plus feet tall, and they have 20 foot of structure, in between the sprinkler heads, and where you can, have to weave up with the lift. So I could think of a lot of different situations, in which remote inspection or some sort of electronic monitoring would be advantageous. One that people always complain about is duct detectors. Being able to locate them and test them is always a pain. So I think those are some good points.
It's going to be interesting to see how it impacts our industry. I think it's a positive. I think that our contractor base has to um, take a recognize what's happening and in their local market get their arms around it and do what they can to help solve the problem and be ready to compete with the OEMs as they're going to try to gobble up as much market share as they can.
Yeah, I was thinking when you were speaking about this is, how is the little guy going to compete with the JCIs of the world have the ability to be a one-stop shop for a fully integrated building? I think it's going to be increasingly difficult for the building owner that is willing to pay the premium.
I conceptually I agree with that, but I do think that the opportunity for the contractor, I'm a big advocate around bigger in our space doesn't necessarily mean better. And what the intent behind that is that the rubber meets the road in our local markets, and you can be ABC Fire Protection in Birmingham, Alabama, and you're going to compete against the top five largest fire protection contractors in the United States, but that customer expects that local relationship to solve that local problem. And you can't necessarily do that from the corporate office in Milwaukee or the corporate office in Massachusetts. It has to be solved right there with that customer. And I think that's the value that our contractors bring to the market.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, it doesn't matter how big your company is or how many solutions you offer if you don't have that relationship at the community level to provide the timely response that the building owner needs to conduct their business. So that's a great counterpoint. Um, so I wanted to speak a little bit more about what you're doing now in mergers and acquisitions and your new role at the Mackey Group. We kind of have a wide variety of people in the audience, so I just wanted to get like a bit more explanation on like what kind of services you offer or like the kind of business that you're involved in now, since it seems fairly broad in my uneducated opinion.
No, Gus, you're spot on there. It is pretty broad. When I went into this, I guess at its core, I've always tried to position myself personally and now my company professionally as an advocate for our industry. Right at the core of what we do, it's about creating safer environments for all of us. And so, how do we continue to advocate for that? Right, we're all passionate about, in this context, fire protection, but you could be an HVAC, you could be a plumber, you could be an electrician. You're very passionate about what you do. So in that context, the Mackey Group was created to help continue to advocate for fire and life safety. So that's at its core. What you see what's happening in the market today, a lot of my time is spent in the mergers and acquisitions space, either on the buy side of the market, so helping investors understand how the market's structured, the ups and downs or the dynamics of the market itself, the strength of service, the strength of installation, the strength of the overall mix, where the growth opportunities are in vertical markets, being healthcare or power generation or telecom or data centers or storage, right? So helping the buyers with transactions, that's number one, or the broader strategy. And then secondly, helping contractors who are trying to think through their transitions right? They've been in business for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. They're at a point where they need to think through, do I continue to position my business for growth, or do I get it ready for sale? I just wrote a podcast, or excuse me, a blog a few months ago. It's going to be published this month, that talks about, I wrote that with a friend of mine, Dave Pelton, and we talk about the process that these owners need to think through with regard to growth or getting ready to transition. Everyone we've talked to, most of the contractors we've talked to, don't know where to begin with regard to getting ready to sell their business. And so we kind of lay that out in that article and some other platforms to share that information. But the Mackey Group is intended to help both buyers and sellers through the M&A space, and then that becomes inherent with regard to then how do you help other companies grow, because not everyone is buying or selling. Some people just need to grow their business. They need to raise some money. They need a strategy on how to grow it. So I've got some clients that I'm helping with that. And then, like I said earlier, just to continue to advocate for the industry as a whole, speaking at conferences and doing podcasts like we're doing today, or simply writing, for magazines or for the blog on my website.
Yeah, that's all good points. So, besides the fairly obvious reason for wanting to sell a business for the prospect of money or a buyout, uh, what kind of reasons do companies look for mergers and, as far as joining with another company, and then acquisitions as far as like buying up smaller companies or buying small companies for market share? I mean, what are the kind of business situations that companies look at mergers and or acquisitions, as to further explore that topic?
Yeah. So let's talk about the merger side of it first, right? So there's obviously two sides to the coin, mergers and acquisitions. So let's focus on the merger side. And this goes back to my days at Tyco, and then what we see happening in one part of our market today. So the mergers, generally speaking, the driver behind that is, how do I become more efficient at managing my business, right? And it has to deal with scale. And what I mean by that is size. Imagine the size. When you had Ansel and you had Tyco Fire Products, individually they're very strong. They owned both paths within their market. So the special hazard side, and the position that Ansel had, or the fire equipment side, and the sprinkler side for Tyco Fire Products. But the true value of bringing or merging those two businesses together was just around scale. How do I leverage customer service? How do I manage warehousing? How do I manage dollars for R&D? How do I manage this global network of what's required? So those synergies kind of drive, on the bigger side of those transactions. So roll that down into a contractor here. Let's use my Birmingham, Alabama example like earlier. And so let's say you're a fire protection contractor in Birmingham and you're really good at sprinkler, right? Well, now I want to go merge with my subcontractor partner that I use for all my fire protection jobs on fire alarm, right? Because the two owners decided, we're going to be collectively better if we merge our two businesses and share resources, right? Let's share a building, let's share trucks, let's share inventory, let's share labor, because two is greater than one. So that's the merger idea, and that still happens today. I think it's a little bit more selective on how it happens today, but there are a number of partnerships out there across the trades, fire alarm, fire sprinkler, special hazards, where people are working together to solidify their position in a given market. So now let's roll over to the acquisition side. The acquisition side is a little bit different. And what I mean by that is that, one, it's been going on for about 20 years or so. It's been probably longer than that, but significant. You can draw a line back to about 20, or early 2000s, and say, when Simplex Grinnell and Cintas started to buy a lot of companies. So that facilitated a lot of acquisition activity. It started to consolidate the market. And what was happening was that, somebody like Simplex Grinnell, who was already big, were buying their biggest competition in some of these key vertical markets that Simplex Grinnell wanted to really get their arms around. The same can be said for Cintas. Cintas's customers have said, hey, we need a fire protection solution. in this market or that market. And so Cintas went ahead and made those acquisitions. So the driver behind that is truly an investment play for their group of investors. And those two examples, those were publicly traded companies, and their stockholders had an expectation about growth, right? And in today's environment, roll it forward to where we're at, where we have been over the last 5 or 6 years. Now it's a lot of private money, a lot of private equity type money coming to the table to invest in our industry. And a lot of that is, one, it's an investment play. They're in it for a period of time, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. And their expectation is that the profits that the industry generates or their portfolio of companies generates then takes care of their investors. Not any different than a stock, but a different type of model with regard to how they manage that. So when you look at acquisitions, acquisitions would be specific to revenue and profit and the growth of that portfolio. A merger is more internal, as I look at it, and it's internal with regard to how do I drive some synergies to make running my business more efficient, number one. And number two, if I merge with my counterpart, my subcontractor counterpart in my market, I'm able to help them meet the needs of more customers, which again is an internal metric with regard to how do I run my business a little bit better. So there's value for both. I think when you look at what if I'm a contractor today or if I'm an investor today, where do I play? I think there's space for our industry to continue to manage both. What's interesting is just the rate that our consolidation in these transactions happen is significantly faster today than it was, even 3 years ago. Just a lot going on.
Wow. Yeah, I appreciate that explanation. As somebody who's more of an individual contributor, it's always seemed kind of nebulous to me, some of these ideas around, business, some of the business development topics and just larger business pieces of information. So I appreciate that explanation that spreads some light on some of the histories around mergers and acquisitions in the industry. So, yeah, I think that's always good perspective to have for any professional. But, yeah, I wanted to speak with you about this idea you talked with Drew a little bit on the podcast. It was a problem that I've heard brought up more than a couple times in the last year, which is the need for people to join the workforce in fire and life safety, or this kind of churning need for people to join the industry, and how you were talking about the low visibility of fire and life safety being a problem because we're kind of last on the list for new people who are, technician or kind of across the board to have the opportunity to enter the space since there's already low volume of people coming into the workforce for some of these technical roles. But I thought that was a great point, and I keep hearing it with everybody I talk to about the need to increase visibility and to just bring people into the craft because of the like you've been speaking to the work increase. Yeah.
So yeah, it's a great challenge for us. When I was go back, 15 years ago when I was at Ansel giving presentations to the senior leadership at Tyco about the challenges that we're facing as our baby boomer employees were getting ready to retire. So now we're actually past the peak of that, on the backside of it. So now our workforce is starting to feel that. And what I've learned over the last 15 years is, one, you really have to take care of the employees we have, right? So competitive pay and benefits, truly committed to training and development. And it's twofold. One, what does the company need to train that employee around, and how do we develop that employee to meet the needs of the company? But I think more importantly, it's as a company, do we truly understand what the employee wants to do with their career? I've been very fortunate to go from human resources to M&A to sales and business development, now to run my service operations and technology. I've worn a lot of different hats over, a 25-year career in a number of different industries, right? I've been fortunate enough to work with a number of leaders that were willing to support me and open doors for me to do that. But as business owners today, as you look at your employees, are you creating pathways or at least opening doors for people to develop in the areas that they choose, right? So, somebody who wants to go pursue, let's say they're a fire sprinkler technician, or maybe they're a designer, but maybe they want to go pursue a fire protection engineering degree or a 4-year degree in fire science, right? Their pathway at the end of the day may not be a full-time job with you, right? Because now you're going to help them go get certified to become a firefighter in your community, right? But that's part of the process. And I'd rather be part of a company that helps nurture and grow people to do what they choose for their career or their profession, because I think that feeds upon itself. You open doors for more people, that more people are going to be attracted to your company versus just somebody who's just kind of one way. Well, I'm going to develop you for that nice at 3, but I don't want you to become a nice at 4 because then you could take away someone else's job. That's short-sighted. I think we need to look at the bigger picture. So that's one. As you look at the contractor space and how we have to become more committed to training and development of our people. I also see an opportunity across the industry for the large manufacturers, number one, and the large professional associations to come up with a common solution, or at least let's say common, I say a structure to how we attract and train people coming into the space. Right? Pick any OEM. Ansell's better served when they're out there supporting and sponsoring training programs dedicated to restaurant service technicians or fire extinguisher technicians. Amerex would be the same, right? Viking would be better served. Viking Sprinkler would be better served when they're supporting apprenticeship programs and training for sprinkler technicians, or maybe valve repair technicians, or whatever it might be within the local market, because now you're able to get talent earlier. Most of these trades are recruiting from high schools through job sharing, through co-op type programs. So from a fire protection perspective, how do we get these young people into the shop to shadow our technicians, to be exposed to either statewide or local education programs, so they can really learn the industry early, and start to go down a path that will keep them in the space for a long time.
Yeah, I like that your point that you made about, taking care of existing employees and also looking at, how do we provide incentives for people to get into the industry. I like the idea of professional organizations taking a vested interest in giving back to the community and providing ways to make it easy for people to get involved. I think that's a great idea. Um, yeah, I wanted to round out the interview at the end. I know we've talked about a lot of large market factors, but yeah, I just think even maybe more broadly in general in business, what kind of trends do you see going forward? We touched a lot on technology and adaptability and kind of some of these topics that are been hot and heavy in the industry right now. But yeah, do you see any markets that are? It seems like a lot of different markets are experiencing a boom right now. But do you see any specific markets experiencing a boom? Have you had any experience with any of these? Any of how fire and life safety touches like cryptocurrency or anything like that?
Not necessarily on the traditional cryptocurrency side, right? So you look at what's the influence that fire life safety is going to have on that market. Where fire and life safety is going to fit is in the server farms and the infrastructure required for cryptocurrency. Right, these essentially are very large, very complex data centers, right? And they need fire protection. There's a lot of redundancies. I understand that how they're structured, right? But even if you're a 12,000, 20,000 square foot facility full of servers, you have generators, you have different types of airflow. All right, how are we going to protect those banks of servers? Not any different than we do with a data center today, but it just adds another level of complexity with how you protect that space, right? So let's use that from a broader perspective. So it's telecommunications and data centers. I think those are always evolving, right? Every major data company is continuing to evolve how their data centers are built, how they're managed, how big or small they are, and where the levels of security come into play. You can say the same for telecom, right? Now we're on 5G, but we know that as soon as 5G is implemented, 6G is coming right behind it, right? So that infrastructure continues to change, right? So you have a fire protection need in that space. I think the other big issue is energy storage, right? So we have, in certain regional markets across the United States, we've got our power grid generates excess power. They're using energy storage systems, so lithium ion type battery packs and battery systems to collect that excess power. So one, how do you store it? How do you manage that safely? Because as we all know, if you've ever seen a lithium ion fire in a Tesla, thermal runaway is a significant issue, and there doesn't seem to be a really strong solution to put those out. So now it's thermal management. How do you control temperature of those battery packs so that they do not get to thermal runaway? So I think that energy storage is going to be a significant challenge for our industry for the next 10 years, 10, 15 years. And then roll into that then feeds into power gen and what we do with generators, and how we control power. I also see opportunities in firefighting foam. You made a reference to that earlier, and the pressure that we have around PFAS and PFOs in the foam space. And that also rolls into fuel storage and large refineries and chemical plants and oil and gas networks. So what are we going to be doing around firefighting foam and making sure that we put out good fire protection agents that are, one, put the fires out and create a safe environment for us, but two, do not have a negative impact on our environment. So it's a delicate balance, but I think the foam landscape is going to change. We already see, the HFCs and the refrigerant type gases that are used in fire protection are under pressure right now with regard to how that supply chain is going to change. So I think that's going to be interesting to see, across the market. So data centers, energy storage, which is power gen, and then how do we manage agents across firefighting foam and HFC type gases have the potential to, change how we manage fire protection over the next 20 years.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the change in foam. I was in the back of my head, I was thinking, man, I wonder with your experience with Ansel, if you're still keeping a thumb on the huge changes that have been happening in that market. It's been really, really interesting for me to take a look at what the military has been doing and just the shift away from foam in general. So I see that as a big market mover as well. But yeah, anyways, John, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Where can people find out more about you if they want to connect?
So first place will be my website, MackeyGroupLLC.com. Kind of gives you some perspective of what we're all about. I'm on LinkedIn. Just type in John Mackey. There's a few of them. I am not the CEO of Whole Foods or retired CEO of Whole Foods, but you'll find me there. And then all my contact information, both on LinkedIn as well as my website, is all up to date. It's probably the best path to track me down. I will be at usually any one of our conferences. The first one coming up in February is the Fire Suppression Systems Association in Fort Myers, Florida. I'll be there, and then each of the NAFEDs, National Association for Fire Equipment Distributors, in March, April, May, and then I'll be at NFPA in June in Boston. So we are in a relationships industry. I make a point of getting to each of our conferences to shake hands and support people wherever I can, meet people, and just share perspectives on the industry. And we do that face to face. We've learned how to do it through video calls and everything else, but at the end of the day, it's so much better to do it in person.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you again, John, and yeah, it's been a good one.
Thanks, Gus. Thanks for the time, and be safe.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Be sure to share the episode with a friend if you enjoyed it. Don't forget that fire protection and life safety is serious business. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are by no means a professional consultation or a codes and standards interpretation. Be sure to contact a licensed professional if you are getting involved with fire protection and or life safety. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.